Hey guys, Paul here. So I just wanted to have a bit of a casual, open Yu-Gi-Oh discussion video today about why it is that I play the Yu-Gi-Oh decks that I do. And I also want to hear from you guys, of course, why it is that you play and enjoy the Yu-Gi-Oh decks that you do. So I think it can be really revealing about a player and just their preferences and playstyle and stuff. So what I did was I made a list of all of the Yu-Gi-Oh decks, or most of the Yu-Gi-Oh decks that I've played in the last few years, and sort of why. I also included some decks that I built but did not really end up liking or sticking with, and I think that a lot of it will just be very telling. So yeah, I guess to start off with, I'd say my favorite decks of the last couple years of Yu-Gi-Oh! If you've been watching some of my streams or you kind of whatever, social media, you'll probably know it's Rescue Ace and Vanquisol are probably my top two decks. But some of the other decks that I've built and enjoyed a lot are things like Voiceless Voice, Exo Sisters, and also, I've kind of dabbled in a few other decks, things like Dogmatica, things like Rika, Gladiator Beast, Generators. And I think that you could probably tell just from that alone that I like what I consider to be mid-range decks. Now, I know before you start screaming in the comments, the whole idea of aggro and control, from Magic the Gathering stuff, they don't really translate all that nicely to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game is every deck kind of combos fast. So, I mean, you could kind of call every deck some variation on aggro or whatever, but I'm not going to get into specifics because I really don't care. The point is, I like decks that do not have extremely long combos. I am never been really a big fan of summoning, more than 10 times in a turn and kind of just running through my entire extra deck in one turn or whatever and setting up just an absolutely huge board that takes a bunch of steps. Partly because I don't really think I'm good enough to remember combos. I can certainly, recite a combo and learn it and do it a few times, but I don't, when it comes to playing in tournaments, I don't really like the pressure of having to do a combo perfectly. I've seen so many horror stories, witnessed them with my own two eyes of people who just mess up a small step in a combo in a later round in a regional or something, and it always kind of terrifies me. So yeah, but I don't know, I just don't really like decks that play forever. I kind of want to have a deck that sets up pretty quick and then just sort of passes to my opponent so we can really start the dance. Because to me, that's kind of what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is. It's a bit of a dance, a bit of a conversation. I want to play cards, but I also want my opponent to play cards. And I think that's really important for me. So that's why I like Rescue Ace, for instance. It's a deck that sets up pretty quick and it sets back row cards, but a few key things about Rescue Ace that I really like. Not that many summons. You can usually do the main Rescue Ace play line in 3 or 4 summons. You don't even have to risk getting the Beard if you don't want to. And also, I find that the trap cards and spells that it sets are disruptive cards, but they're not omni-negate cards. And that's really crucial for me. In almost all of the decks I play, given give or take 1 or 2 exceptions, I really don't like cards that are just omni-negates. Cards that just say okay, your opponent activates something and you just negate and destroy it. I think the only exception in a deck that I play is maybe Voiceless Voice with Skull Guardian, but that's really the one. I would much prefer that my opponent get to play cards and I just have answers or interactions to those cards, ways to kind of disrupt what they're doing without outright telling them okay, no, you can't, you just can't do anything. And so for me, when I see people who play decks that will make just these huge boards and 2 or 3 of the monsters just say it negates any monster effect and destroys it, or negates spells and destroys, I don't know, I don't really want to just outright negate and destroy stuff. So for me, Rescue Ace is cool because cards like Extinguish and Contain and even Rescue Ace Preventer and to a lesser extent maybe even Rescue, they can be fun because they sort of interact with my opponent. They will stop them from maybe using one effect one time, or they'll get a monster off the field, but it doesn't just sort of give a blanket no. In a similar vein, I don't like playing decks that have floodgate-esque effects. I don't really find that very fun. It's actually part of the reason why I liked playing Labyrinth as a deck, but I always veered away from cards like Dimensional Barrier when that was around, of course, and the skill drain variants of the deck, just because I don't really, I'm not too interested in telling my opponent just that they can't play. Once again, I like to interact with them. So I did enjoy playing Labyrinth in general, but I just didn't like those particular cards. I'm not a huge fan of just the blowout stuff, because at the end of the day, I want my opponent to play. And so that's similar to Vanquisol for me as well. Vanquisol in particular is very, very fun. It's very interactive, very dodgy deck. That's something that Rescue Ace doesn't offer as much of. But with Vanquisol, I like that I can not only interact with my opponent, I've got Rosin's column nuke effect and Caesar Valais' non-targeting pop, and like I even like the small stuff like Dr. Mad Love where I can like modify attack and defense and it happens to the damage step and stuff like that. I like those sorts of effects, but more than anything, I like that I can like my rescue race monsters can like bounce to dodge cards like Infinite Impermanence or potentially Book of Moon or like Effect Veiler or something like that. So as opposed to once again like negating my opponent's stuff, I'd rather be able to like dodge my opponent's stuff. I think that kind of makes the game feel a little bit more interactive. It keeps my opponent on their toes, but it also feels like it's a fun challenge for me. Another thing I should probably mention too about these decks that aren't like super long combo decks is that because I do play a lot of Master Duel, this applies to TCG and Master Duel, but more to Master Duel. And Maxi is a card I actually like playing decks where I don't have to worry so much about a Maxi getting dropped on me. In the case of like Rescue Ace, Vanquisol, Voiceless Voice, Dogmatica even, like if my opponent Maxis me, I can, seed like one or maybe even two draws to them and still end up with a pretty good board. Like Rescue Ace, Hydrant into Turbulence can usually still set the cards, and like I don't have to worry so much about giving my opponent a bunch of draws off Maxi. I also like that these decks in general are pretty resilient to Multi-Army Fualos as well, because that gets played a lot too. It's kind of interesting because I feel like because of the decks that I play, I have a bit of a skewed view on cards like Maxi and the Multi-Army cards, because I've noticed that a lot of players hate those cards to death, but I realize that that's also because most players are using decks that have to summon a lot, like special summon a bunch and do like really long combos, and so consequently a card like Maxi or a Multi-Army feels especially devastating or especially punishing, whereas like I guess I play these decks where that's not as often the case. And so when you go down the list, like I said, like Exo Sisters, Rika, those sorts of decks, yeah, none of them really have that problem, and they all kind of function the same way. Exo Sisters is setting a couple of disruptive spells and traps, and that's like sort of it. Rika, to a lesser extent, is sort of the same way. I haven't played it as much recently, but I liked it when I did. Some other decks that I've dabbled with, I haven't like had a bunch of fun with. I must say I haven't had fun with them, but I haven't had a lot of experience with them to like really grow to love them. I just think they're okay. Are decks like Gladiator Beast, I had a pretty fun time with that. I had a pretty fun time with Despia as well, kind of before it became just the branded pile. Not that the branded deck is bad, like I don't hate it or anything, but I actually just like playing literally like Despia, what was like Thaumaturge and Despian. There's like the other one that Ad Libitum, stuff like that. Like the actual just Despia cards were very fun to me. Despia Theater, the branded. I loved playing Masquerade. That was a really fun one, burning the opponent a little bit. That was cool. I also like decks that kind of in the vein of interacting in a weird way with the opponent. I like Dogmatica a lot. Something that was really fun about Dogmatica for me, like the Ritual Dogmatica deck, was just the fact that like it had such a strange win condition. It was about emptying my opponent's extra deck, and that was neat because it sort of prevented my opponent from playing sometimes in like a different way. So instead of just being like, okay, I'm gonna put down the Monarch Field spell or whatever, and you can't summon from the extra deck, it's more like, okay, no, I'm going to take away a couple of your key pieces from your extra deck and try to disrupt your plays and combos that way. And it was actually a really fun exercise in learning matchups, because the Dogmatica Ritual deck is not very good. I'll just be honest. I don't think it's a very good deck. And a lot of times you're kind of walking a tightrope, because how effectively it can work depends on what your opponent's playing. If you're playing against a deck that does not even like use the extra deck at all, or barely makes any use of it, then you're probably not going to be getting much out of that strategy. But even if you're playing against a deck that does, you have to be careful, because they're like, if you play against a branded deck and you're sending their extra deck stuff to the grave, that's helping them. Sometimes if you send like, you have to send like Fiendsmith cards, what is it, like Fiendsmith Desiree or whatever, it can like pop your stuff. So like, you got to be careful. You got to really know what the best things to send are, because some decks can really surprise you with like, I guess how how they can like recycle extra deck cards and stuff like that. Like it's by no means like a free win. So I always found that to be a pretty fun way to play. Now, as for decks that I sort of didn't end up liking as much as I maybe wanted to, I used to play Cyber Dragons and I used to play Gren Maju, and these were kind of decks that were very strong for going second. And I had a period of time where, I don't know why this camera's being weird like this, but I had a period of time where I liked going second decks a bunch. Like I was like, okay, going blind second is fun because I don't have to worry about like the coin flip. It kind of takes that RNG element out of the equation, which is kind of nice if you're playing in a tournament. And I can just let my opponent combo and go second, and like that's the end of it. But I realize that I don't like how linear some of those strategies are. They kind of get boring to me after a while, and sometimes they're not. Like when I played Grenmaju, it was fun. This is like we're talking like 2019 maybe, against like Orcus, Sky Striker, Salamangreat, kind of that format toss. It was fun, and I was like using cards like Super Poly, and I was just like tearing up these like Thunder Dragon and Orcus fields, and like it was a good time. But I don't know. I didn't like that. I just never felt like I was like interacting with my opponent. If anything, the goal was kind of to like beat them in the least interactive way. So it's like let them set up their board and then Super Poly it, or like Kaiju it, or just kind of ignore it as best I could. And yeah, I didn't. It got kind of boring to me. Cyber Dragon's sort of a similar story. Like it's a going second deck. It could go first. It could. I mean, it wasn't amazing. I think Cyber Dragon just needs a little bit of new support, and I'll probably be back on that. But I don't want the support to just be like summon one huge fusion monster again. Which I get it. That's kind of the thing with Cyber Dragon, but I would like it to be, I guess, more mid-rangey and interactive in my style. Now, anyways, as for other decks that I did not like or like played temporarily, I guess is where these fall. Salamangreat. I like Salamangreat. It kind of fit the bill for me until it kind of like, as Salamangreat got more support, it got more consistent, which is cool. But then I started realizing mostly Salamangreat sort of like became more of like a at Ignister, Code Talker, Cyber Slop. Like it slowly moved in that direction with a lot of the new support. And so for me, that made it less appealing. I don't hate the deck or anything, but it just made it less appealing for me. Rockets was a deck that I really wanted to get into, like the Rocket Dragons. I always thought it was cool. The whole like Link monster points to them, and then they chain, and then like they pop stuff, and it was cool because like the Boral monsters didn't let your opponent chain effects to them, so it would ensure that your Rockets could chain. I always thought that was neat. But then unfortunately, the Rockets got really like roped into just Dragon Link soup, and so I really, as you guys know, do not like a deck that just summons a whole bunch, and that is Dragon Link to a T. So that kind of pushed me away from that deck. Not that I'm like, I can't still play it anyway, and I can always like play Rockets if I wanted to, but it turned me off from it some. And then another deck that was like that was Mermails. Like the new modern Mermail support is really cool, and I remember liking Mermails a lot back in the day, like in 2012, 2013. But I feel that the modern Mermail deck it's another long, kind of frail combo deck type of thing. Like if you go first, you can do a lot of insane stuff. You can barrier statue lock your opponent and like hand rip them with Mulan Glacia and stuff. But I don't like doing that. The combo's really long, so that kind of isn't fun for me. Like I don't want my opponent to sit here and watch me play for 10 years. And also like I don't want to like take all their cards away and then put a barrier statue down and say they can't play, because then I'm not getting to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And I want to play my Yu-Gi-Oh, man. So yeah, that's a few examples of the decks that I didn't like. And then finally, I thought that a good place to end this, and you guys can also answer this part, is like decks that I kind of want to build or I'm considering building because I feel like they sort of fit the style. The first one's Draco-Tail. Now I know that that's a deck that's been doing so well competitively that maybe it would be a little bit boring to just play the same thing everybody else is playing. But I've considered it. Draco-Tail seems like it might be kind of fun. Also another deck that I kind of have looked at is like Sky Striker. Now, my only problem with Sky Striker is that it's kind of become just a dedicated go second, break board, and then just kill them deck. You can play it other ways though, so I might mess around with that. And then another deck that I've kind of been looking into playing is Fire King, because I feel like it sort of fits the bill as well. So, and then people really like Fire King. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the decks that I like, and hopefully this was sort of insightful and maybe told you something about the way that I like to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And the way that I don't like to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Like I said, I'm very stubborn about like, I kind of want to win with decks that I like, and I want my opponent to play. I just want to like have a bit of a dance. I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a conversation. It's a tango. It's a two-way street. I don't want to just lock them out. I don't want to combo forever. So yeah, what about you? What sorts of decks do you build? What goes into deciding about a deck? Something that I completely left out of this because I realized it's not as big of a deal for me as it is for some players, is I don't have many ties to like decks themes very much. Like I'll kind of play anything. Like what I typically do is I pick the deck based on more of like its play style, and if it looks cool, like that helps. But typically once I find that I like a deck, I then grow to appreciate the artwork and like kind of the card like stuff going on, like in the card artwork and the card names and things like that. So it's kind of I pick playstyle first, aesthetics mostly second. Okay, well that's it. My camera's like bugging out, so I think that's probably a good place to stop it. But I do want to hear what you guys have to say about this. I will be reading and hopefully responding, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bastard.